you own a P80 V70 XC, you know that you can't access the fuel pump unless you drop the entire rear suspension and then the fuel tank, or cut a hole in the floor. There's other cars that are like this as well, but I'm specifically working on my Volvo, so it'll be best used for that, but a general guide for all other cars. I didn't cut this hole in the floor. I was looking into a fuel leak that was coming from the fuel pump and discovered this. So I'm actually fixing someone else's hack job here. If you want to do your fuel pump and you want to cut a hole in the floor, you can use this as a guide. And if you're fixing someone else's mistake like I am, this is a great video to watch. When you cut the access hole in this car, you have to cut around the seat mount, and when they reattached it, it's kind of moving around and it's not very stiff, which I don't like that the seat is mounted to something that's not attached to the rest of the floor pan. In addition, the sealant that they use is really kind of junk. It flakes right off. I don't know what it is, and they didn't do it all around, so I want to redo that as well. When I started this, my plan was to take it apart, kind of see what they had done, and then maybe reuse what they had done and make it better. And I quickly realized that I just didn't want to do that. I would just take it all apart and figure it out later. The sheet metal they used was way too thin. It didn't provide any structure whatsoever. I think it was galvanized, so at least they have that going for it. And as I mentioned earlier, the sealant really didn't bond to the sheet metal, so I don't think it was sealing anything out. And lastly, they didn't coat the metal in anything, so I assume over time the edges would rust. I mean, I'm in an area that gets winter and salt and snow, so that's a concern. Even though there is a splash pan underneath, I don't want the bare edges of the sheet metal where it was cut to rust over time. I also think that the screws they used were way too long. The fuel pump is really close to the floor pan, and I'm surprised there was no damage. The leak that I had ended up just being that it wasn't screwed on tight enough, and so when you filled the tank, it would leak out. I will say that whoever cut it at least used the right tool for that and seemingly had a steady hand, because the lines are really clean, and that helped a lot with reattaching it and sealing it all out. The first step in this repair for me was to seal out any bare metal. You can probably do this with normal spray paint, but I have a friend who's into old Mopars and he swears by POR 15, so I wanted to give that a shot. Advanced Auto Parts had this little kit for $30. Comes with everything you need: gloves, paintbrushes, the paint prep, and the paint itself, so I picked that up and that's what I decided to go with. To be completely honest, I've never used POR 15 before. I'm just going off what the instructions say on the box, so if you've used it and have some tips or tricks, please comment and let me know. Otherwise, the first step in the process is to degrease the surface. I'm only filming this piece on the workbench because it was easier, but I'm doing it to both the removed piece and the existing floor pan on the Volvo. For both the degreasing and the paint prep, it says to let the surface sit wet for 10 to 15 minutes and then rinse off with water. So here I'm rinsing off the degreaser, then paint prep, rinse, and then you can paint. Once all the prep work is done, it's time to paint. I will say that it's much more watery than I expected. I'm not sure why I expected it to be thicker, but I understand the foam applicator now, and it is really runny. My main goal here was to not only coat the bare metal edges, but kind of overlap it onto the painted surface and get the little bolt holes as well. I believe the instructions call for 2 coats, so I did that on both pieces. And as you can see here, it dries pretty glossy. As far as I know, it worked because it adhered to the painted surface. I guess we'll see in a couple of years if my car rusts out or not. Just one last note about POR 15. On this piece, you can see that there's some bubbles in the surface. And from what I read, that's when the humidity is too high, and so it cures at the wrong rate. I think it cures too fast. I'm pretty sure it doesn't affect the function of the paint itself. I think it's just an aesthetic thing, and this is under carpet and under the car, so I don't really care. But if you were doing like suspension parts or something more visible, you'd probably care a little more about how the final appearance looks. I had some extra aluminum strips and self-tapping screws from when I did the whole fog light install, and so I decided I would use those to mount this thing back together because I didn't want to use that sheet metal solution that was previously used on this. So what I decided to do was bend the tabs into place and see if that would hold it tight enough. I could put some on the back side, some on the front side, hold it from both directions, and hopefully that would be more secure. What I decided was best was take these 2 tabs and put them on the underside of the floor pan, and then the piece that was removed would have a place to sit, and then I could secure more tabs on the top. This would be a secure fit, and if I ever have to remove this and do the fuel pump in the future, I can with minimal effort. Because I'm not reusing their sheet metal solution and doing my own, I decided to fill in the holes that were drilled in this piece and in the floor pan. The best way I found to do this was to kind of skim coat the hole. If you try to shove a bunch of RTV in there at once, it just falls out. So you want to do a nice thin layer on one side, thin layer on the other side, and then you can build up more after that and seal out that hole. Here I'm attaching the inner tabs to the bottom of the car, the floor pan, and all in all it went pretty smoothly. I just used vice grips to kind of hold that little tab to the body, and then used the impact driver with the self-tapping screws, and it worked okay. The biggest thing is there's just not a lot of room to work around. Here's a close-up where you can see the upper tab is attached from the top, the lower tab is attached from the bottom, and that was just because there's more room to get up from the bottom than there is from the top. There's that particle board floor pan thing underneath the carpet. I don't really know what it is, but I didn't want to have to remove it. And here it worked out just like I'd planned. It fits nicely on these tabs, I can silicone around it, and then I can add some other support tabs on either side. After attaching just the top and bottom tabs, I was surprised at how sturdy it was. I would say it's probably as stiff as it was with the sheet metal solution. I went real slow attaching these because I didn't want to mess anything up. I didn't want to have to take this back apart and fill some holes because the screw slipped or something like that, because that tab that I'm trying to attach into is pretty small. If you're real nervous about it, you can probably drill a pilot hole, but I just kept a steady hand, went slow until it kind of bored itself into the metal, and then it was all good. Here I wanted to lay down some RTV before I added the side tabs, because at least now it'll be one complete sealed surface, and then I can add some from the backside, and I can add more once I add those other tabs. I bent a few more aluminum tabs into the proper shape, and I'm adding them as support tabs to the inside of the car. I know the placement seems kind of random, but I'm trying to miss the existing holes that I filled with RTV, as well as the tabs that are attached on the underside of the car. While I'd prefer them to be more uniform, one, no one can see them, and two, if it functions properly, and more importantly functions better than what was there, I don't really care. It's also only a semi-permanent solution in that it still allows me access if I have to get the fuel pump. I mean, somebody else already cut a hole in this floor. If I have to replace a fuel pump, there's no sense in me dropping the whole rear end when I have a hole in the floor already. Here's one final shot from underneath the car, just showing that I tried to seal out everything as much as I could. Again, there's a belly pan that goes on here, covers it, but don't want to take any chances if I'm here trying to do it the right way. After letting the RTV cure, I came back out and inspected it, kind of just seeing if I can move this mount at all, and it's only wiggling on the sheet metal itself. The piece of metal is not moving from the rest of the floor pan, which is great news. I did research a ton before I went through with this. I wanted to see how other people did it on their cars. A lot of older GM vehicles don't have access holes. I've cut a hole in a Suburban floor before to replace a fuel pump. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. I think for this Volvo, this is a pretty good solution. I don't have access to a welder or anything like that, more fabrication type supplies. This is all from Home Depot, making it an inexpensive and easy solution for anyone to do. I did see some people mention mastic tape to seal the gap, and I thought about it, but there's not really room on the underside to do that, and on the inside I don't really think it matters, which is why I went with the RTV. If you have your own solution or an improvement to this solution, please comment. If not for me, for everybody else watching the video that might be able to do this better. At the time of posting this, it's been about 6 months since I did this, and it hasn't had any issues. It's been through rain, it's been through a little bit of winter, and all looks well. Thanks for checking out this video, everybody. Let me know if you found this helpful, even if it's not a Volvo, especially if it's not a Volvo, actually, that'd be really cool. Leave any questions or comments below, and don't forget to subscribe.